Breadbox Media programming is brought to you by Jack Kane Ford. Find your next Ford Tough vehicle at caneford.com. Woodhill Community Center. Have a hand in the heart of the city. Support their mission with your donations at woodhillcommunitycenter.org. Toyota in Nicholasville Superstore. Online consultants are standing by right now to help you find your next Toyota. Visit toyotaonnicholasville.com. Lexus of Lexington, home of the best-selling Lexus IS. Find yours today at lexusoflexington.com. Introducing the redesigned CatholicSingles.com, featuring new ways that put the spotlight on the person and their faith, not just a profile picture. For the past 20 years, faithful Catholics have used CatholicSingles.com, and the reimagined CatholicSingles.com website is ready to help single Catholics take the next step in sharing meaningful relationships with other faithful Catholics. Remember, CatholicSingles.com for faith, fellowship, and love.
Well, hey, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Lisa, Hendey, and Friends. I am just very excited on this Monday morning as I record a conversation to be back with you after a fantastic weekend in Littleton, Colorado. And I want to thank all of my new friends from Light of the World Church there for their warm welcome this weekend and just the fantastic, just Colorado beauty. Boy, did you guys put it on a show this weekend for me with your sunsets and sunrises and everything that came in between. So thanks for the opportunity to serve there. So friends, I am just so happy that on this week's show, we welcome a very special guest. And this is a book that came onto my radar a few months ago because I had a chance to kind of get a sneak peek at it. But today we welcome Joshua Miller, PhD, who is the co-author of the compelling book, and I don't say that lightly, Unrepeatable, Cultivating the Unique Calling of Every Human Person, for today's conversation, which will be about story, vocation, and mission. Joshua Miller is the co-founder of Inscape, and he has many, many wonderful credentials, including a doctorate in philosophy of the human person. And perhaps most importantly, he and his wife, Brooke, are the proud parents of 6 amazing children. And Dr. Miller joins us today and for a great conversation about this fabulous book, Unrepeatable. And Joshua, do you mind if I dispense with the doctor as we welcome you to the show? Please do that.
Sure, yes. And Lisa, I just want to thank you for the warm endorsement that you gave of the book. It was really important support for Luke and me early on in our project, and I just want to make sure that I express that thanks because we're very grateful to your support.
Oh, well, thank you. And it's always fun to kind of see a book at it, towards the beginning of its inception, and then to kind of see this beautiful product that I'm holding in my hand now. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the book, but before we dive into that, Josh, would you just tell us a little bit of your story?
Yes, I grew up as an evangelical Christian in a family of people that were very fascinated with how God designs each unique person. And my grandfather and my father as well worked in an organization where that was our focus. And we used a narrative, story-based approach to helping people understand their uniqueness that was then applied for helping organizations make good hiring decisions and team building and so forth. And then in the early 90s, I became Catholic, particularly through the pro-life movement, and saw in the church's teaching about the human person so much of my early work with my father and my grandfather confirmed and elevated, but brought to a much greater level. And I used their work for years and years and years, both before I became Catholic and afterwards, but then segued into something a bit different, which we'll talk about with Inscape. And I was married about 20 years ago this December 28th. And as you mentioned, my lovely wife, Brooke, and I have 6 kids, one of them off to college here in the fall, and one of them a very precocious 3-year-old.
Well, you're in the thick of what you talk about in this amazing book. So
Sure
I'm kind of curious about how this project was born. This is a collaboration with the noted Luke Burgess. And so where did Unrepeatable come from? And how does what you've learned as a parent kind of like have its genesis in this particular book?
So both Luke and I love philosophy. We love theology. We love the practical application of that around the flourishing of the human person. And I, for one, am a rather slow learner. But when I became Catholic, I loved the work of John Paul II and the Second Vatican Council documents around the call of the laity to sanctify the world and so forth. And after several years of being in the thick of Catholic life, in parish life and with university life, and just talking to people and checking notes on the rhythm of Catholic life, I, for one, realized that there's so much about John Paul II's pastoral vision for the human person that was really at the periphery of Catholic life. And in particular, his strong statements that the church has got to take seriously the unique calling of every person, and that it's really critical for renewal. So that's a bit about me. And Luke had a very strong business career right after school in the early 2000s. Was on Wall Street for a time, and really came back to the faith 6-7 years ago. And when he did that, he jumped into seminary. And as he does, he's kind of a positive force of nature, I describe him as. But he realized in seminary that a lot of the teaching around unique personal vocation wasn't being brought into his formation in the way that he had hoped. And of course, he had a wonderful experience in seminary, but he talks about this in the book. But yet there were also some gaps in terms of this emphasis from John Paul II on each one's own calling and how that fits into these broader state and life discussions around vocation. So from different angles, we came at this message that we must be about cultivating each one's unique calling.
And thus the concept of our unique and personal story. So the book is really aimed at helping those sort of in early formation of their lives, those that we might think of as youth or young adults. And it offers a template that's also sort of mirrored in this workbook that you have, like an 8-week companion program. I want to emphasize up front that, don't tune out if you think that you're not a youth minister or you're not a parent, because what I found in my personal reading of this book as a newly christened 55-year-old woman a week after my birthday, that I'm still discerning my own personal vocation, and that, this is a lifelong process. So the book is really for anyone, correct? Yes.
And it's interesting how, as our project went on and as it was received, and in particular, the quote that you gave as an endorsement, you talk about, picking up this book to help others, but be prepared to rediscover the blessing of your own story too. That message, I think Luke and I have both recognized is really important, particularly because our own unique calling is dynamic. And one of the things we talk about in the book is cultivating keys of discernment, having keys of discernment so that we can be responsive to what the Lord wants on a regular basis. And so all those of us who are later on, I'm 45 years old, and even those who are in retirement age can really benefit from this book because of the emphasis upon knowing oneself and the pattern of gifts that God has given, and then responding to how those gifts can be borne out in service to others on a regular basis. So I agree heartily with what you're saying, Lisa.
So one of the big emphasis of the book is this idea of vocation. And, when we in the church hear that word vocation, we often think of a vocation to the priesthood or the religious life or consecrated life. Mm-hmm. So how is this idea of personal vocation really relevant for anyone in their life, not just those who think they may want to be a priest or a sister when they grow up?
It's such a good question. At certain points, several people have asked us whether or not we should even use the word vocation because of what you're stating here, because at least in a Catholic context, we often immediately assume that if someone has a vocation, that they're called to the priesthood or to the religious life. And Luke and I decided that no, we would keep the term vocation. First of all, because it's used by the Church, John Paul II, in his own messages to the youth, for example, will talk about the importance of understanding personal vocation. And both Pope Benedict and Pope Francis have emphasized also the importance of personal vocation and mission. So for that reason, we didn't want to give up on it. But the other thing is that if we used another term like unique calling or unique purpose, then we're still left with the problem of really a misunderstanding or a limited understanding of vocation. So we're kind of boldly steering into the cultural issue that we have of only thinking of vocation, at least having a propensity of thought about vocation that's a state in life, priesthood, religious life, and also marriage to a lesser extent. We want to engage in this conversation around the meaning of vocation and show how multifaceted it is, and that it includes our state in life. It includes our universal call to holiness as well, but it is a call that God gives to each person by name. And in that call by name, it includes those other dimensions. So hopefully that's not too convoluted.
No, I think it makes sense. And one thing that really struck me when I read this, of course, we all reflect back on our own stories when we examine the stories of others. And in an early read of Unrepeatable, one thing that I was reminded of, I do these frequent visits with elementary school children because of my Chime Travelers children's fiction story.
Yes.
And
series.
One of the themes that I discuss when I go into the schools is to encourage kids on two themes. The first is that we're all saints in the making. We're not there yet, but we're each called, even as a first or second grader, to be a saint in the making. And then the other piece of this that I talk to them about is that you're God's storyteller, that each of us will tell God's story in a different way through our life, whether that's, through writing or art or dancing or even making a great video game, that we all have gifts, that are fundamentally given to us by God with story. But I was struck in reading Unrepeatable, your emphasis on, and this harkens back to your grandfather's work and to the work of Inscape as well, the importance of understanding story as part of that vocational calling. Just say a little bit about that and why story matters.
It's so critical. And I love the way you set that up, that God has a story and we tell that story through our own unique ways and in the ways that we are called to serve. So I like to think of each person as a unique reflection of God, given a task to reflect God in the world that has never, ever been given before and will never, ever be given again. And we image God in God's story to the world. And it's also the case that we can think about the whole economy of salvation, God's whole story, and then our part in that story, this kind of subplot that we have, or the story of our lives as a dimension of God's vast narrative. So it's very, very critical for us to emphasize that. And I think it's a way that we connect our readers with, really, there's a whole multicultural reality that people tend to understand themselves and the things that are most important to them in the context of story. And for our postmodern age, where so many folks are confused and looking for meaning and looking for purpose, one of the ways that we believe and have experienced many, many, many times is that when you get people to talk about their own stories of being deeply engaged in activity that was life-giving, that they believe they did well, that they enjoy doing, that as they share those stories, especially to an empathetic listener, that it's a great, great moment of love, of affirmation. It's a way to get to know people at a deep level, fairly quickly. And this is a message also to parents and mentors really seeking to know the people under their charge. So story is just a powerful way to engage people in terms of knowing them. But it's also this. As people share stories about being deeply engaged in activity that they've loved, that they believe they've done well, there's a pattern of giftedness in those stories. And it is so powerful to help people recognize the patterns, the themes of those gifts. It's really a reflection of God's unique word for them. And when people can recognize the pattern of unique gifts in their own stories, it is an awakening to a dimension of what their unique calling is. And that's why we emphasize it as a really critical aspect of this discovery of one's unique calling.
In the book, you refer to it as achievement stories, correct?
We do, yes. We debated back and forth about the right way to name the story, but we landed on that.
I like that. And one thing that I really love about Unrepeatable, it opens up in just the very opening pages of the book, because you kind of start with this very surprising story of Bob Dylan, which I'm like, okay, well, this is super cool from somebody from Steubenville to be telling me a story about Bob Dylan I've never known before. But it was, as I anticipated our conversation today, this weekend, I had a chance to give a retreat in Colorado, and I was thinking about during the course of the retreat, one of the gifts that I have during these retreats is to be able to convey some stories from my own life or lives of the saints or just different people, but to do it in that very story-oriented way, to show maybe a photograph of an adventure that I've taken and something that I've learned from a person that I met along the way. So what is it that, like, when we ask, about an achievement story from someone, how does that help us as a mentor to help them along their path to vocation?
That's such a good question. It's such a good question. Well, it's valuable because it allows us to have the other person be revealed, or it allows the other person to reveal him or herself according to a profound and unique gift that God has given them, where there is great joy. So we often encounter one another and ask questions about one another at a fairly superficial level. Where are you from? Well, I'm from Texas. Where do you go to school? What do you do for a living? All of those things are important. And of course, as we get to know other people, we will learn those things. But it's not typical for people to be asked about golden memories where they were engaged in activity that they deeply loved and found that they did well. We tend to keep one another at more arm's length. So when we ask those questions to people and they have enough trust to share those stories, it enables them to show the unique way that they've been given to love and serve and be full of God's joy. Right? God came to give us life and to have it in abundance and to give us great joy. And it's very typical when people share those stories that it's satisfying and fulfilling, yes, but in almost every case, Lisa, as people share those achievement stories, there's some gift to others that is being also expressed. And the irony here is that even though people are talking about themselves, they often get so lost in describing the action and what they did and the context of the people around them who received what they did, that it's not at all a kind of selfish navel-gazing. It's getting a picture of a person in action. And that's a way that we really see them. And they get the experience of revealing themselves to another who's listening and who loves them. So it's just a great revelation of persons that we don't often do with one another, and we ought to do more.
Well, let's take, for example, the dad out there who's the parent of, let's just say he's the parent of a junior in high school who's got the summer vacation looming before him, but who also knows that once the fall hits, that's going to be down to this season of applying for colleges. So how does dad open that conversation with his son? What are some kind of language that might be used to start that conversation in a way that's familiar and intimate enough within a family, but leads in the right direction? conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one of the ways is to say to the child, if you had a month off and you didn't have to worry about preparing for colleges, or you didn't have to worry about a summer job, or you didn't have to worry about all these things, and you just had time and space to do something active that you'd really like to do, what would that be? And that's a kind of wide open question. It's a safe question. And it's interesting what emerges from that. Another approach is to say, all right, let's look back at the last several years of high school and junior high school, and just think about some things that you've done that you've been drawn towards. And also to give permission in that question to say, it doesn't have to be some great success in contemporary standards, GPA, gold stars, success on the athletic field or among friends, et cetera, but just give kind of a wide open space to say anything over the last several years that you've enjoyed doing and you thought you'd done well. What are some things that pop up? And those two very broad, open-ended questions will often lead to a gold mine of results. And the child may say, well, actually, it was, going camping with my friends out in the Great Smoky Mountains, and we, et cetera, et cetera. Could be anything. But as the father then pays attention to the details of action and just follows up in an open-ended way, allowing reflection, there is, again, a gold mine of results that can come from that in terms of seeing the child more clearly. And I've had that in my own experience as a father, really being blown away by what my child said to me.
And what you learned from it, I'm sure. So, yes. Again, friends, if you're, I know you're not just tuning in, but just a reminder that our guest today is Dr. Joshua Miller, and he and his co-author Luke Burgess have written this amazing book, Unrepeatable, Cultivating the Unique Calling of Every Person. Another reason, Josh, that I love the book so much is that you take a turn into the book on an emphasis on something that I'm really trying to learn about in my own life, which is missionary discipleship.
Yes.
And this beautiful teaching kind of prompted in Pope Francis's document, Evangelii Gaudium, The Joy of the Gospel, on how we're not called to be just missionaries or just disciples, but rather missionary disciples. I've been really trying since that document came out and over the course of the last year to really pray about what that means for me. What does it mean to you, and why do you bring it up in Unrepeatable?
For the first part of my career, I'd say, really as an evangelical Protestant, when I was working with my grandfather and my father, we really emphasized that you come to know your uniqueness and you come to know your purpose through the pattern of gifts that is present. And there's great truth to that. When I became Catholic, though, I really wanted to explore more about what does the church teach us about living in a community, living in a body where it's not so much about the unique person flourishing only, but the unique person flourishing in community. And one of the things that I've really awakened to over the last few years, and certainly Pope Francis has led me personally in this direction, is that, and you also do so well in your book, The Grace of Yes, that it's through loving service to others, through giving ourselves to others, sometimes in a way that we don't plan for, we don't expect, and we might not even want initially. But in that service, we awaken to our own gifts oftentimes, and awaken to how we can use those in service to others. So we really believe that it's a huge dimension of personal vocation in the context of the church, being a member of the body of Christ, having fulfillment in our stories, but always linking that fulfillment with sanctifying the world, raising other people up. So I'll close on this. We believe that a critical dimension of helping young people, and really all of us, to discern our calling is to emphasize that by engaging in acts of service, we both awaken to the needs of the world and then how our gifts can fit those needs. So there's last thing. There's a quote by Frederick Buechner. He's a Presbyterian theologian, and he speaks about how our calling is often at the threshold of where our great joy and the world's deep need meet. And I like that very simple way of recognizing that our joy is at a place of service.
Can you repeat that quote for me one more time?
Yes, and I'm paraphrasing right now.
Okay.
It's Frederick Buechner, but God's calling is where the world's deep need and our great joy meet, or words to that effect.
I love it. Well, I'm gonna look up the full quote too, because I want to have it in my office, someplace that I can look at it regularly. It leads me to a follow-up question, which is really that, your emphasis with this Unrepeatable project is not simply just to put out a book and to have people read it, but rather to create sort of a worldwide community through the resources that you're offering, and that encompasses as well the accompanying kind of guidebook that comes along to this, a workbook that can be used in families or parishes or classrooms. Why is this so compelling at this time in our church and in our world?
When he was first elected Pope, John Paul, after a couple of months, clearly in his own pen, clearly with his heart, wrote an encyclical, Christ the Redeemer of Man, Redemptoris Homini. And he says in that document, it's number 21, and here I'm paraphrasing as well, but he talks about how true renewal depends upon each person's own vocation and the cultivation of that vocation. He also says, and here I'm not giving a paraphrase, but verbatim, he talks about the human person is the primary and fundamental way of the church. And by this, he says, each unique, unrepeatable person. He states that about 8 times in one paragraph. So John Paul II was very clear as part of his pastoral vision that the renewal of the church depends upon our loving attention to each unique person. Because after all, that is what Christ did and does for us. He doesn't love us as a unit. He doesn't love us as a kind of just a member of a larger body. He loves us each by name and as unique persons, and we who are called upon to love as Christ loves must do the same. And so what we are about is helping to cultivate in the church, which desperately needs this, an attentiveness to each one's calling. And so, yes, we're building a network of personal vocation mentors. We have training resources to help people recognize the beauty and the significance and how to cultivate unique personal vocation. And of course, the book resource and the workbook resource that you mentioned as well. But we really do want to be at the service of a movement in the church around cultivating the calling of every person. And of course, that is a unified effort among many of us. I count you as a close collaborator in that.
Can you hear me saying amen in my office when you're, I love when you can take your book title from the teachings, the repeated teachings of a saint. That's totally awesome.
Oh, I love it.
So Josh, for somebody who's out there, who's listening and who's thinking of, we're recording this on a Monday, maybe they've been sitting in their parish on Sunday and they've seen, the bulletin announcement about youth group, or they've seen, students preparing for the sacrament of confirmation, and sort of, I hate to say in some of our parishes, there's a little bit of going through the motions yes. in this emphasis. And it actually, I hate to see times when teens actually sort of consider their sacramental preparation or involvement in their parish family community as just another item on their weekly to-do list, rather than something really that's at the core of helping them to have a not only a fulfilling, but also a successful future. So how can the average person out there like me in the pew, I already know what I'm going to do with one of my copies of Unrepeatable, and that's to make an appointment with the youth minister at my parish and to offer it to him as a gift. But what would you encourage somebody who's not, necessarily in ministry, but who just wants to see this come alive in their parish family? What can we do?
I think the first thing that we can do is identify those closest to us. Maybe family members in a nuclear family, maybe it's cousins or aunts or uncles, or people with whom we work closely or with whom we go to our parish together, is recognize a group of people who would clearly stand to benefit by conversation about their own calling. And one of the things that I so appreciate about Pope Francis's ministry and his latest letter, Gaudete et Exsultate, is that this universal call to holiness that we all have is always expressed in a unique way. But circling back to those people closest to us, is to engage them in rich conversation about who they are, what they're called to. And this is where the achievement story that we talked about earlier, I think so applies, is to begin with having conversations with people about what makes them come alive in their unique gifts. And then to have conversations about how that is expressed wherever they are, with whatever context they are. But one of the things I love about the achievement story is that it's often an awakening to a unique gift that's clearly that person's own. So maybe the person does not want to have a conversation about vocation, but you just want to love that person by listening to them and their own stories with great empathy. It's those simple but very, very profound conversations that begin to awaken a number of things. One, it shows the other person how loved they are if they're listened to in a very affirming way. So that's a very, very simple, basic step. But I do think it's helpful to start in conversations about calling with those who are closest to us.
That makes great sense. That makes perfect sense. I know we're winding down to the end of our time together. Is there anything that we haven't had a chance to converse about that you think is significant for folks that are listening today?
I think one of the things I would lead with that's become more and more, I think, important to me and that is that we know fundamentally that we are called to love. God is love, St. John tells us in the sacred scripture, and we are called to love. And to really ask ourselves, what does it mean to love another human person as deeply and fundamentally as possible? All right, we provide food. We provide shelter. We provide basic education. When those things are taken care of, what can we most give to another person? And I believe that when we cultivate their unique calling in its dynamism and its complexity, that we're really loving that person at a profound level because we're helping them be who God created them to be. So I guess I would leave that connecting a love for another human person with the cultivation of their unique calling. And then at a very practical level, I just invite people to go to unrepeatablelife.com where they can get copies of the workbook and our book as well.
Definitely want to underscore for our friends that unrepeatablelife.com is filled with so many fantastic resources, and it's a great jumping off place to the various social media platforms where you'll also find kind of ongoing encouragement for the role that all of us have to play in this important process. So for Dr. Joshua Miller, I just want to thank you so much, Josh, for having been with us today and for the important work that you're doing. Please know that I will be doing my best to pass along the good news about Unrepeatable, and I'm just so grateful again for the chance to chat with you today and for this this great work that you've commenced in all of our hearts.
You are more than welcome. And Lisa, I am very grateful for the opportunity to share. And I do count you as a collaborator in this great work of helping people be who God made them to be. So thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you. And hopefully we'll have a chance to share a meal and some stories in person sometime soon.
That would be fabulous.
Well, friends, that is it for this week's episode of Lisa Hendey and Friends. You can definitely wander over to lisahendey.com where you'll find the show notes for this week's episode, which will include links to not only the book and the workbook, but also the various platforms, including unrepeatablelife.com, where you can get a hold of great resources to start to make this a reality in your own life and in the lives of those who are important to you, those who mean the most to you, your family and loved ones in your care. So definitely venture over to the website sometime this week, lisahendey.com. You can follow me on social media just about everywhere at Lisa Hendey, and we definitely want your feedback on how we can continue to improve this podcast. I want to thank my friends at Breadbox Media. You heard their announcement at the beginning of the show. Their wonderful production and assistance makes this little podcast possible. So when you hear those sponsors who were mentioned at the beginning, I'm not floating around in a bed of podcast money. That's actually support for the network of Breadbox Media, which is growing and building on a weekly basis to help bring you resources like this one. So thanks to Pete and to the people at Breadbox Media. And until next week, I hope you have a fabulous week, friends, and I'll see you soon. God bless.
Breadbox Media programming is brought to you by...
We want to help others, especially in places of strife, such as the Holy Land, where Christianity is dwindling by the day. But how to help? Here's an easy way. Buying products through the Holy Land gift shop. Every product you purchase at myfranciscan.org/shop helps Christians support their families and stay in the Holy Land. Olive wood, embroidery, spices, and many more authentic products from the Holy Land are available right now at myfranciscan.org/shop. The Holy Land Gift Shop, bringing the Holy Land home.
Thank you for listening to Breadbox Media. Find more about us at breadboxmedia.com.